Few things in gaming are as satisfying as taking on gigantic, scary, or even just downright powerful bosses. And the Legend of Zelda games had this down to a science. With over 25 years of brawling with the baddest of bosses, we're gonna count down the 10 greatest in the entire series. Hey, I'm Nervous Nick for Screwattack's Top 10 Zelda Bosses.
Number 10.
The fantasy genre as a whole just loves itself some giant spiders, and the Zelda series has been preying on our arachnophobia right from the start. Goma is about as much a Zelda tradition as boomerangs and bombs, and even though she's had more than one memorable appearance, none of them top your encounter with her in Ocarina of Time. It's a dark room. You can't figure out what to do, so you look for clues. And for crying out loud, is that rustling noise coming from like the ceiling or something? Oh dear God, it's math! As an introductory boss, Goma set the standard for battles in one of the most revered games ever made.
Number 9.
On the other end of the popularity spectrum, Four Swords Adventures had something of a high entry fee, what with all the peripherals and crap it required to play. But for those of you who saw it through to the end, Vaati surely is a standout. You're greeted with the always nostalgic Link to the Past boss music before throwing bombs into his swirling cyclone of death. But the most satisfying part of all? Firing yourself out of a cannon and using your downward momentum to plunge your sword directly into his eyeball. Heck yeah!
Number 8.
Tingle is fighting money by shooting money that the money shooting money gave him while on the moon, which is owned by the money. We were so close to not even putting this one on the list because at first we couldn't decide if this was one of the greatest or worst things to happen to the Zelda series. It's definitely one of the greatest.
Number 7.
As long as the boss fight is fun, it doesn't have to be super difficult to be one of the best. You wouldn't normally want to take that kind of approach for a final boss, but for Wind Waker, hey, they did. As you once again do battle against the great king of evil Ganondorf, the weight of the Great Sea feels like it'll collapse on you at any moment. You've also got this nifty little tag team thing going on with Zelda, who shoots Ganondorf in the back with light arrows to open him up for attack. Oh, and you do kind of drive a legendary sword forged by the goddesses straight through his skull so deep you probably punctured a lung, and that's always good.
Number 6.
Even as one of my favorite games ever to be programmed, I have to admit that Majora's Mask is so weird. Like, giant tiki man weird, or turtle with palm trees on its shell weird. Oh look, this boss is a common fish. And then it just goes all the way to gigantic robot goat that shoots laser beams kind of weird. Once you enter Goat's Arena, or is it God? I don't know, why did they put the H there? You have no other way out but by reactivating this beast and fighting him on a high-speed chase. It's super intense, and by the end, the ceiling's collapsing, stuff's blowing up, goat lasers are fired, and you'll probably want to go fight him all over again. Plus, defeating him turns the frozen wasteland into bright and cheerful springtime, a welcome ray of happiness in the dark world that is Termina. Thank you, Robot Laser Goat.
Number 5.
The Super NES marketing team always liked to boast the ability to have large sprites displayed on the screen, and few bosses ever took advantage of this as well as the Helmassar King from A Link to the Past. I mean, dude's almost as big as the room you fight him in. Imagine a giant horned lizard with Ridley's tail and an iron mask, and you've pretty much got the same thing. More or less. Smashing his one defense to bits with your magic hammer and piercing his cranium with arrows could only be made more satisfying by one thing: watching him explode to bits from the tail, leaving nothing behind but a heart. Link to the Past, you don't disappoint.
Number 4.
That whole evil doppelganger thing may be more than a little bit cliched, but then again, not every doppelganger mimics a master of swords, bows, bombs, and hammers. Shadow Link, Dark Link, call them what you want, but this evil version of you is pretty much the only part of the water temple that everyone can agree was worth looking forward to. In fact, I and lots of other people I know used to copy our game save right before this fight just to go back and play it again whenever we wanted. He may have just been a sub-boss, but he's managed to be more memorable than the real bosses. except for the next three.
Number 3.
Skyward Sword, love it or hate it, had some creative boss fights hidden underneath all those hours of backtracking through the same areas guided by the most annoying and useless companion I've ever frigging had. And I don't care who you are, I don't care what you think of any other aspect of this game, Golden Robot George Washington Galactos is flipping amazing. 2 boomerang blades, 6 arms that you can rip right off his body, and get this, he actually has enough sense to keep his danged weak spot covered. But before long, Galactos says, "You know what? Screw this." No. The battle with Galactos hits its best when you can pick up his weapon and absolutely mutilate him. Most satisfying thing ever! Plot twist! He was a 6-year-old girl all along. Nice going, you child murderer!
Number 2.
You will use the spinner from Twilight Princess in exactly 2 places after the dungeon you acquired it. You will use it at this part, and you will use it at this part. But when it's at its most useful, it's during one of the most awe-inspiring boss fights in the entire Zelda continuity. Normally, nobody pays attention to the little descriptor each boss has in their introduction, but if any of them were deserving to be addressed by their full title, it's Twilight Fossil Stalord. Playing pinball with his spinal column was fun enough on its own, but it's his phase 2 that dropped all the jaws. Jumping from rail to rail, dodging fireballs and slamming into his skull face, then going in for the kill with your sword? Whew! If only we got to experience this awesomeness for longer. It's almost time for number 1, but before we get there, let's recap 10 through 2. Number 10, Goma. Number 9, Vadi from Four Swords Adventures. Number 8, Money! Number 7, Ganondorf from Wind Waker. Number 6, Robot Laser Goat. Number 5, the Helmassar King. Number 4, Dark Link. Number 3, Galactos. And number 2, Twilight Fossil Stalord.
It's number 1.
As we've gone over before, final bosses don't need to be the most difficult to be the best. But a lot of what makes them so satisfying is that it's this moment that you've spent the entire game working toward. Oh yeah, Ganon's on this list twice. But is the number 1 Zelda boss the 4-phased war in Twilight Princess? The mano-a-mano sword duel that started the events of the series in Skyward Sword? Or how about the climactic battle that kicked off the whole franchise? Nuh-uh. It's something even better than those. I couldn't do it. I couldn't reasonably, logically, morally justify bumping Ocarina of Time's climax down even to number 2. Who could forget the ascent to the top of Ganon's tower, fighting his strongest henchmen, and hearing his organ music growing eerily louder and louder? You stepped through that massive door and you read that classic line. "These toys are too much for you. I command you to play me in a game of tennis!" Everything about this fight is what a Zelda boss should be and more. You bring the Great King of Evil to his knees using tools previously found and your newly acquired light arrows, only to go through an escape sequence in the middle of the battle and then confront his second form, Ganon. No descriptor needed, just Ganon. This was probably the scariest part of the game. You couldn't even tell what he actually looked like because it was so dark. All you could see were eyes, horns, swords, and bigness. My first time fighting him, I didn't know what to do, and in a good way. I felt outmatched, I felt overpowered. I was up against impossible odds. Of course, that just makes it all the more satisfying when you finally plunge your sword right between his eyes. The final battle against Ganon from Ocarina of Time was cinematic, climactic, and was a fulfilling conclusion to one of the most beloved games of all time. It's just, too bad that not all of Zelda's bosses could be half as epic as this. Next up,